Let's get a quick take on the group that put a controversial anti-fracking measure on the 2014 ballot. The Colorado Community Rights Network announced this week that they intend to place the same measure on the 2016 ballot. Patty Calhoun from Westward, this was one of the main measures that John Hickenlooper crafted the big deal with Jared Polis and everything else to get all these different fracking measures. This was one of the main anti-fracking ones. It looks like whether or not he wants to, Governor Hickenlooper might have some more dealing to do next year. What do you think?
Well, we all knew in 2014 it was only a short-term solution, that deal. So it's not surprising that it's coming back. People are as concerned about fracking as they've ever been and not feeling all that kindly towards oil and gas right now. Even though it's an unrelated development, just the visuals from the Animus are definitely making people a little more environmentally conscious.
David Copel from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. Do you think there's going to be another deal? Is this going to keep kind of becoming that sort of thing where it pushes everyone to the table? Or at some point, do you think some folks are going to have to just let it get to the ballot and see what happens?
I think my guess is that the big money on the left, which is what something would need to succeed, is going to say enough is enough with this stuff. You're screwing around. Our governor's pro-fracking. He's a very pro-environmental guy as well. This fracking obsession that some people have, I think, is increasingly seen by the public in Colorado as like anti-fluoridation was in the late 1950s and early 60s. When you first hear about it, you know, oh, this is interesting. You know, yeah, they are putting chemicals in our drinking water, but then you find out it's actually not a communist plot. It doesn't cause all these terrible problems that people talk about, and we have community experience with it existing for a long time. This isn't an anti-fracking amendment, by the way. It's immensely broader and says basically corporations don't have any rights against local control. So here's how that would play out. The tattered cover refused to turn over to local government, the North Metro Drug Task Force, its records on a book which a customer had bought. The case went to the Colorado Supreme Court. The Colorado Supreme Court said, no, this violates the tattered cover's free speech rights and freedom of the press. The tattered cover is a corporation. If this anti-corporate rights amendment passed, then our local communities in the form of the North Metro Drug Task Force can violate the First Amendment rights of any group of people who, like a bookstore or lots of others, organize themselves in the form of corporation.
Eric Sonderman, political analyst. David brings up the point that this was one of those anti-fracking measures that went beyond fracking, and probably when you talk to Chamber of Commerce folks, it was the most dangerous because of that. Do you think that is going to create more of a response now that we know it's coming?
We'll see if it's coming. As David points out, we'll see if the money shows up behind it, as was the case a few years ago. We all knew a couple years ago that the Hickenlooper compromise was a kick the can down the road compromise. Well, now here we are down the road, and you knew this issue was going to come back in some form. I think there's a school of thought that if this is the only ballot issue, a few years ago, remember, there was a whole package of proposals. If this is the only one, this one's going to be a hard one to swallow for a whole lot of voters, regardless of what their views are on the particulars of fracking. The other factor is oil is now at what, 40, barely much more than $40 a barrel. There is not the intensity around this issue that there was when oil was $100 a barrel and fracking is going gangbusters. It is not quite as hot right now as it was a couple of years ago. At some point in time, I'm not sure I'm convinced it's 2016. At some point in time, this issue is going to hit the ballot. Every big issue in the state ultimately finds its way onto the ballot. Question to me is when and what is the particulars of the proposal.
You make a good point, Eric. I mean, OPEC's done more about fracking in Colorado than any ballot measure. Ben Gilt, political consultant, wrap it up for us.
Well, you know, it's interesting to see it come back. Everyone's covered the fact that this was part of a compromise that happened a couple years ago. I think that, as others have pointed out, this coalition is not the coalition that has the sort of money behind it. I don't anticipate that the sort of mainstream or central people in the party on the left will really get behind it, because I think it's too broad, it's too much. I think that the state of Colorado has clearly shown with other initiatives that are sort of vague and broad-reaching that we don't accept them. So unless it was to really curtail government power or something totally different, I just don't see it happening. Although I do agree with Eric's point that it will ultimately get to the ballot, because we do have a state that really allows for that to happen.